Well, hi and welcome everyone who's joined us today for the masterclass on alignment of organisational and personal performance. And specifically in this period, I guess, as we are transitioning from an environment of a sort of prolonged lockdown to one where we're now opening up socially, economically and professionally. I'm Donna Burr. For those who don't know me, a partner in our interim executive practice here in Melbourne. Now, the impetus for today's session was really twofold. Firstly, in conversations with each of you as our candidates and clients of Watermark, we've heard united challenges that you're all fronting into. How do you each ready yourselves as leaders as we emerge from this state of prolonged lockdown? And how do you lead your organisations through the emergent challenges of post-lockdown world to be sort of match fit and strengthened and making sustainable businesses? We've heard many stories of trials and triumphs sort of over the last 18 months, trials of strained and fatigued workforces, slowed down supply chains, strains on revenues, cash reserves, and triumphs of, new ways of working, new innovations that probably wouldn't have occurred had, it been the status quo pre-lockdown. And this sort of development of resilience and agility in a way that we've probably not really known before now. We felt in hearing these stories that it would make sense to provide an opportunity or forum for us to each share those stories and learnings, and certainly hear from some thought leaders on the subject. And to that, really delighted to welcome back two friends of Watermark, Paul Lyons and Pete Clark. Many of you attended our April call, a webinar where Paul and Pete talked us through strategies to achieve both personal fulfillment and with your professional success. And after special requests, the team are collaborating again to sort of come together today to share their insights and strategies on this topic. So I know you've each received, or you've all received their bios, but by way of brief introduction, Paul Lyons is the co-founder and managing partner of Mental Toughness Partners. He has extensive experience as a leader in recruitment and talent across Australia and Asia, and advises executives, business owners and boards on their mindset, careers, leadership and culture. And Paul is joined by Pete Clark, the founder of 21 Whispers. Pete's mantra, uncertain times require certain minds, and that it's all about mindset. And we'll be delving into that today. Specialises in virtual facilitation and coaching and using mindset and behavioural methodologies to bridge the performance potential gap. So before we start, some housekeeping as always. We'll be recording the session. No personal details will be captured on the recording. The conversation will probably go for about 30 minutes and we've allowed plenty of time for Q&A. So get ready for those questions. And to that, please be active on the chat online here and the Q&A forum. Make sure that your setting is to all panelists and attendees so everybody can sort of see the chat. Feel free to respond to one another through the conversation. I'll manage the Q&A and sort of pick up some of those questions that we can pose to Paul and Pete towards the end of their session, and we'll try and get through as many of those as possible. And at the end of the session, we will certainly distribute this recording without the sort of Q&A content. We don't want to sort of identify people on the call, so certainly the content and subject matter we will send through, some slides and Pete and Paul's details for you to connect as well. Before I pass to Paul, a brief polling question. Now we're going to come back to this polling question towards the end of the session. Pete's going to address this through his conversation. But really, Ali, yes, thank you. Pop that up on the screen. To kick us off, when you reflect on 2021, is it a year to remember or forget? I welcome you spending just a few moments reflecting on that. Ali, I don't know if we can see the results as people are responding to that. Oh, here we go. So there we go. A year to remember, about 3/4 a year to remember, and about a quarter or so a year to forget. Thank you for doing that. We'll just we'll park that for now and certainly come back to that towards the end of the session. Paul, I might hand over to you.
Thanks, Donna, and hello everyone. Hello, Pete. My role today is just to look at observations, or my observations regarding organisational performance, really from an external viewpoint. And I'm going to do that through 3 segments. In fact, Peter and I are going to alternate as we work through. So my headline really for this little segment is there are significant market challenges, but we still expect the numbers. And the we being markets, shareholders, board, senior leaders, we still expect the numbers that we experienced before the pandemic. Somehow, anyhow, we still want the numbers. So let's unpack that. To start with, there have been incredible challenges the last 18 months or so. VUCA challenges abound. Even without pandemic, you've got volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity everywhere. So in the last few weeks, China's uncertain economy, you've got stagflation worries, you've got regional political issues, and then you add in the pandemic and you have, as Donna alluded to, supply chain issues, pandemic-related productivity issues, government uncertainty about lockdown or no lockdown. So there's some great challenges there to domestic growth. And Capgemini recently surveyed CEOs, and 91% said that the pandemic was the greatest threat to growth in their company. And frankly, I was surprised it was only 91%. But despite these issues, we still expect the numbers that we had pre-COVID. And incredibly, the financial indicators are probably suggesting that they can be met. So if you look at some of these numbers, so the ASX is up 50% since March 2020, 50%. GDP is up 1.4% in the year to June 2021. Unemployment down 0.7%. And we all know the effect on house prices, up 20% since the beginning of COVID. So all the indications would be that the financial indicators are being met. But I'm wondering whether we're missing the point. Are these financial indicators of organisational performance really true? Are they masking other issues that are coming through? And that's my sense, that we've got a greater set of challenges around the corner when we emerge from the pandemic. And that's the thing that I'm going to focus on shortly when I come back for my second segment. So really, over to you, Pete. That was my first little segment underway.
Thanks, Paul. So what Paul and I have done is try to consider your perspective as an executive or a client with all of those challenges. And despite, the whimsical, in every difficulty, there's opportunity. Let's be real and optimistic. There's some big challenges for us out there. And rather than trying to give you a binary, do this, do that, yes, no, we've constructed our thoughts using the infinity loop. Now, most of you, I'm sure, will know what the infinity loop is. It's the figure 8 on its side. And so it kind of goes round like this. And so we often find, for example, if we over-index on task, we forget the people side. If we over-index on people, we forget the task side. So we're assuming that your positions require you to do both, people and task, not either or. And so that's how we've positioned this. Neither what Paul or I are going to say is an absolute necessary. There might be the occasions when, if you're doing some painting, you go into Bunnings, you get the color card. At one end it's white, at the other end it's black, and everything else, and of course this phrase has been hijacked, is a shade of gray. And that's, I think, the land, even more so, through which we're experiencing our people, our numbers, our clients, our products, our organizations, et cetera, et cetera. That's how we've positioned it. So Paul's going to deal with the organization side, I'm going to deal with the personal side. So I'm going to start on the personal side by saying that leadership flows downhill. I'm going to show you a quick example of this. So I do a lot of work with a company out of the US that data-driven, strengths-based, and benchmarks your leadership at the top 10% globally. So, we always say, I want to be the best. Compared to who? This is a one set of data that show that leadership flows downhill. No matter which country you're in, it's kind of obvious to say the good leaders will get more engagement from the staff than the bad leaders. And I know that's kind of obvious to say, but it's also what the data is telling us. Anywhere around the world, top percent leaders are getting top percent quartile engagement from their staff. Bottom percent are getting the bottom percent. So again, I'll share that with you. But the point I'm raising here is, certainly in chatting with Paul, I have, and Paul hasn't, ever seen an organization outperform the quality of the leadership within the organization. So you set the benchmark, and everyone else, apart from the odd outlier, kind of sits beneath it. So hence this leadership flows downhill. We can be no better than the leaders above us. And you as the executive, whatever position, has a significant part to play in that. And it's interesting how often we argue against our circumstances, and yet we're complicit in creating the circumstances we say we don't want. And if we're able to take 100% responsibility on that, we're part of the problem. We can also therefore be part of the solution. So thinking about the importance of leadership, thinking about the importance of, as you probably have a bunch of leaders, a leadership team, there is in Paul and I's world, a little bit of a myth that when is a team not a team, when it's an executive team. I don't know if that's true, but it's certainly some of the hard work that we have to lean into. And you've kind of got to have a principle. You might not know how, but you have to believe that 1 + 1 = more than 2. Now, every time I've surveyed leaders, I've asked them, I've worked with groups and I asked that question, almost bar none, everyone accepts in principle that 1 + 1 should equal more than 2. But the doing the work on making that happen is the harder part. And often it's just the conversation that you have. I remember courting my now wife for a number of years, and she would talk about us all the time. And she'd ask to talk about us again this weekend. Let's talk about our relationship. And of course, being compliant and respectful. Yeah, cool. Eventually it's like, why did we have to keep talking about us? And then I got it, that the conversation itself was the strength of our relationship. And so there might be a temptation when you go back in, whether it's face-to-face or not, to talk about the numbers and talk about stuff and talk about the targets and talk about how we're going to get the business back on its feet, therefore over-indexing or not index enough on the conversations and the connection and the things that you've missed out on fundamentally as humans, but as leaders, as people in an organization that are looking to you a little bit for clarity and direction and certainty in all of this Booker experience. So that's the first thing I would say, is that leadership flows downhill, and you have a massively important part to play in making that happen. Back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Pete. So this is connected really with what Pete's saying and what I was saying. Really, I was trying to get away from the financial indicators and just mention that there are human challenges emerging that we don't yet fully understand, and they're just around the corner. So I did ask the question previously, are purely financial indicators a relevant measure for organizational performance? And I don't think they are just the only indicators we should use. I think there are significant human issues and which aren't yet reflected in those numbers, and that we should be looking at those numbers sooner rather than later. So let's tackle 3 or 4 challenges, if you like, that are on the horizon, that are human challenges. The first one, many of you will have heard of, is the great attrition, or it's also labelled as the great resignation. So this hasn't yet been fully experienced in Australia, but by all accounts, it's on the way. It's prevalent, certainly in the US and the UK, and we're likely to see it Q1 of next year here. So just to give you an idea, what it is as it suggests, it's a great resignation. There's a huge wave of resignations through the US from employees. The figures say 15 million people in the workforce resigned since April 2021 to date in the US. And that on an annual basis is about a quarter of the workforce. Interestingly, there was a recent study from an Australian HR consulting firm, Employment Hero, and they've surveyed a sample of Australian workers, and 40% have said that they're either looking for a new role now or will be in the next 6 months. And that goes up to 48% over the next 12 months. So what we're saying is 1 in 2 of the Australian workforce thinks that they'll be looking for a new job in the next year or so. And so the question is why? Why is this happening? And I think it's because of COVID to a great extent. So people are just tired. They're burnt out. They're grieving in many respects. They've probably lost some hope and meaning in their role. And there's just this feeling that they've been squeezed to make sure they retain their performance just by working harder and longer hours. And I think there was another survey I saw, in fact, this morning on LinkedIn, somebody had quoted that 40% of people feel that their mental health has been impacted over the last 6 months because of this feeling of burnout. And I think the point is with this feeling of burnout and tiredness and loss of hope is that it can't be fixed by just money. So that people are looking for this renewed sense of purpose and feeling valued. They're seeking more social and interpersonal interaction from their colleagues and their managers. And there's also a real dislocation, I think, from leadership. So there was a Gartner survey I saw recently where they surveyed a sample of the workforce, and 41% said that they believe the senior leadership is just purely acting in a bubble in their own interest, and that there's not that sense of feeling that we're all in this together, very much trying to push down the challenges to the people beneath them. There's another issue, I think, which is what I would call the working from home paradox. So having just said that the great attrition may have been caused by the pandemic, Forbes magazine said that 94% of the workforce wants some kind of workforce flexibility, which includes working from home moving forwards, 94%. Now, obviously, everyone's different and has different experiences. And I think through the working from home experiences, there are differences in gender, family size, space in your house and so on. But overall, it seems to be that there's greater satisfaction for an element of working from home, because there's that element of flexibility. People see it as there being benefits through less commuting time, less office politics, but also less connection, which is a negative. And from an organisational perspective, certainly there have been some benefits in terms of cost savings for property. Perhaps there are also some issues around cybersecurity, but the problems around productivity that have been perceived, they actually haven't materialised to the degree that was once thought. So there's an issue, as I say, the working from home paradox. Which is it? Has it been good or bad? In one sense, it's created this burnout, but many people would like to continue an element of that flexibility moving forward. A couple of more issues that are around the corner. The third is vaccine. What a huge issue that is. Do we say that you come back to work if you're double vaxxed? Or the choice is yours, and nobody knows at the moment which way companies are going to go. But it seems in terms of comments on LinkedIn and other forums that employees themselves might have a say in this, that they may be saying, I'm not coming back to work unless everybody's vaxxed. But who knows? That issue is just around the corner. And then the other one I saw, another quite interesting headline, was around leaders hurt too. So a lot of what I might have talked about today is the challenge that we have with the workforce, but leaders also feel disconnected from the organisations. Leaders are also exhausted, and whilst they might not fully understand the human challenges of their organisation, there's an element of them feeling the same way in many respects. So another study, this time by Lyons, an HR consulting firm, and they found that senior leaders, executive leaders of firms, 59% feel totally overworked, 72% feel more pressure to deliver during the pandemic and are feeling squeezed, and most pertinently, perhaps 84% feel the responsibility for the high levels of burnout of their teams. And that's probably at odds with the other survey, which suggested that employees felt their leaders were somehow disconnected and were working in their own interest. So there are 3 or 4 human issues that are emerging just around the corner. And I don't think we're measuring those at the moment. They're not in the financial indicators, but they're certainly going to have an impact. Next, Pete.
Thanks, Paul. Look, one option is if we just ignore all of that, surely it'll go away. And I know that's probably not an option, but it feels like that sometimes. If I just bury my head, then maybe it'll all go away because it's just in the too hard bucket. So another option for us is where I'd like to pick up on my second observation. If you've been around this world, if you've done any educating yourself around leadership or anything around business, you've probably heard of a chap called Simon Sinek. He's pretty prolific online, and he encouraged us all to start with why. Now, I've got a slightly different view, and not just because of what we've been going through. I thought of this anyway. I think we should start with who. As in, who do you want to be? Who do you want to show up as? Because whilst why is a great question, if it's linked to your current who, and you haven't given that identity some thought, then it kind of doesn't really serve the new who. So that's my starting position, that I think some pondering, some wondering, some imagination, some aspiration about who do you want to be? Who do you want to show up as? And what I'll say is that we now know that personality, our identity, is not fixed. It's not permanent. Dan Gilbert, one of the Harvard professors, wrote about what he called the end of history illusion. Meaning, if you ask an 18-year-old, have you changed over the last 10 years? They'll go, yeah, 8 to 18, yeah. Are you going to change much between now and 28? Nah, probably not. You ask the same 28-year-old, have you changed a lot over the last 10 years? Yeah, 18 to 28. Have you seen what I've gone through? Do you think you're going to change a lot in the next 10 years? Nah, not really. You ask the same 30-year-old, have you changed a lot? And the pattern goes on and on and on and on. We are not fixed. We're malleable. Our brains are plastic. This whole idea of neuroplasticity means we can change things. There's certain aspects of, we can choose to be someone. And certainly through the lockdown, me and my family, we've gotten closer in watching certain TV programs. One of the ones that my wife and daughter particularly enjoy is America's Got Talent. I enjoy some of the entertainment aspects. And there was a young lady that came on that program. Jane Markovich, I think is her name. She goes by the AKA Nightbird. And she was going through some pretty significant health issues. She was in remission at the time, but she didn't have any hair. So she was going through a real hard time. And what was fascinating, absolutely fascinating, it kind of reached out of the telly and smacked me around a little bit. She said, I can't wait until life isn't hard anymore before choosing to be happy. And it kind of made me think, oh, I wonder if I'm waiting too long for things to go back to normal. I wonder if things are going to go, let them settle down a little bit before I choose to be anything. And I'm not, well, I would be spruiking happiness anyway, because we've got that the wrong way around. But anyway, this identity, this person that you think you are, maybe some things to consider in questioning that. And if I tie it to this whole work from home paradox, again, maybe provocative, I think it's the wrong question. I think location, home or work, is the wrong question. We should be working from our head or our heart. We should be working from our client or our organization's perspective. We should be working from a short, a medium, or a long-term perspective. So this location question for me is too limited. we ask ourselves different questions, we can expand what's available to us. So if I just spruik some questions in your direction to perhaps cause you to think a little bit differently, or it plants a seed. If I ask you things like, the people that you serve, internally or externally, what do they need you to show up as? Have you considered that question? Have you considered what the future is demanding of you now? Not that you're perfect, but have you planted and have you considered the internal infrastructure to put yourself in a position to serve the future? So when there's great resignation, whatever it happens to be in this country and in our region, I wonder if people are asking the question, why should I be led by you? And I wonder if you've held the mirror up and asked that question. Why would anyone want to be led by me? Well, because I pay them. Yeah, all hygiene factors. But that's potentially something to consider when we balance this organizational and personal performance, the yin and the yang of those things. This is a perfect opportunity to reconsider, to refresh, to adjust at the edges who we want to show up as. So I'm provoking you to consider that question. Start with who. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Pete. You've provoked me, but I'm still probably going to provide a traditional set of responses at this point in time. So my final segment is probably exploring some of the solutions that organisations may use to solve their human challenges. They're probably not, as I say, going to be as inspiring as Pete's, but nevertheless, these are some of the options that they may have. The headline probably is do better with less, finding new ways to make things better in terms of productivity and enjoyment. And when Pete and I were talking about this several weeks ago, we talked about this feeling that organisations were trying to do more with less. And Pete's observation was right. Well, perhaps it's trying to do better with less, just be more creative. And an element of that came through in his last segment. So there are two or three things perhaps to look at here in terms of what leaders can do. And I think the first one probably is that leaders and organisations as a whole just need greater empathy and understanding with regard to what their employees have been and are going through. So they need to engage with a human lens because employees want a meaningful and purposeful relationship at work. It's not a transactional relationship, but I think that's the perception at the moment from employees that perhaps it is at the moment. And organisations perhaps are responding in that way. They're responding to the challenges by increasing pay or providing a retention bonus. And employees are seeing this as a transaction, not as an appreciation or an understanding of what they've been going through. So there's this subtle shift that's required by organisations and executive leaders. Organisations, notwithstanding what Pete said about the questions around the hybrid workforce or working from home, what they should or shouldn't be, organisations have got a real opportunity to make it the great attraction by developing a hybrid workforce that works for everyone, or a hybrid situation that works for everyone. So working from home is only one element of flexible working. There needs to be a broader approach, but there's a huge opportunity to engage and empower to provide this great attraction. There's lots of opportunities to do this. We were talking about the French government's legislation on the use of technology, or banning the use of technology, email and messages out of hours. So what they're trying to do, obviously, is to reduce the burnout. There are organisations that are compressing working weeks from 5 days to 4, same number of hours, but an extra day off to try and reduce the burnout. The smarter tech, more effective communications, innovative work practices. And I noticed there are some organisations that are now appointing people specifically to look at flexible working. So there's a new title called Head of Remote, where organisations are looking at people who can focus on ensuring that flexible working is productive for the organisation, but also satisfying for the workforce. And obviously, there's a real opportunity to use interim executives more to get more out of the projects that are being used or utilised. And finally, I was reading a McKinsey white paper recently that I thought was excellent. It really was looking at trying to achieve transformational growth. So looking at ways of being creative that you could do better with less by just looking at the problem in a different way. And McKinsey was saying that organizations that focus on transformational growth often will get much more out of it than companies that are just trying to do the same as last year, but get more out of less. And they had figures saying 40% was the difference for a transformational growth exercise. And I picked out 3 from this list that I provided that I thought were quite interesting. The first being a zero-based approach to growth. So that's not just trying to do what we did last year, but just do it better. It's looking at the problem in a different way and seeing whether one can use technology and people in a different way. And that in doing this, you examine the opportunities and the challenges in isolation from a year ago. And one of the examples they gave were these dark kitchens where restaurants have had to innovate to survive. And so they've developed dark kitchens that specifically are for takeaway and home delivery. There was another point about delivering more constant growth. So for companies to look for perhaps less revenue, but more stable revenue. So looking at much more subscription-based business models rather than transactional business models. And then thirdly, which was an interesting one, I'm sure Pete and I have both seen this in our work, is that strategy should just be exercised with more rigor and passion. And there was a feeling amongst employees who are involved in these transformational exercises that this is rarely the case. I think only 37% of employees, according to McKinsey, involved in these growth exercises would say that the strategy has been exercised with rigor and passion. And they should probably involve more employees as well. So traditionally, these projects only involve 1%, 2% of people in the workforce. And McKinsey are recommending that to get the best results, that should be a broader spread. Everybody should be involved in looking for this creativity. So I guess from my perspective, organisation performance can be improved by engaging more with the broader workforce and building on purpose and values, making it more meaningful for everyone involved, and measuring it in the process, because I think that could be an early warning system to challenges around the corner if you can somehow measure the temperature of how people in the workforce are feeling. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I'm going to refer to the poll at the start when we asked you the question, is 2021 a year to remember or a year to forget? And I noticed it's about 75-25. I wish to make no judgment on what's been going on behind the scenes for you to answer that, but I would refer to those great linguists, the Eagles, who said some dance to remember and some dance to forget. Because my final point is, I've only ever seen organizational transformation happen when personal transformation happens first. And so my final provocation is leadership flows downhill. Start with who, but you've got to work on you. Now, I know you're busy people, right? As leaders, we probably feel responsible for many things, and we drive ourselves to get things done and, not let anyone down. We push a little bit harder and we say, I'll get to that soon. And we kind of neglect our own needs, put everyone else's needs ahead of ours. We're often there for others and not there for ourselves. And as the work piles up, we get no time to do that. And so the cycle continues. So unless we do the work on us, whether it's what are you taking from the remembering of 21, or what are you doing to magnificently forget what happened so you don't carry it into 22, the work starts with you. And we know that humans, and you would be one of them, I'm assuming, carry more than weight through lockdown. We carry our past, our trials and tribulations, our hopes, our dreams, our fears, our concerns, and they have gathered enormous weight over the last 18 months and probably beyond. So unless we do work in that vein, working on what's going on in my internal world, it's less likely to show up in my external world. You are by far one of the biggest instruments for good or evil, and that might be a blessing or a curse in your organization. And I'm assuming that you would have such an external focus to help everyone else. We often put ourselves last. And I'll give you 3 quick tips. And it's not really tips, it's more the process I've observed of people doing this successfully over the years. And this is going to sound so simple. That step 1 is you have to decide something to work on. Now, it seems such an obvious thing I'm going to work on my executive presence. I'm going to work on my empathy. I'm going to work on my communication or my strategic questioning or my relationship building across, out, in, etc. Great. Everyone tends to take step 1. Step 2, ironically, is you have to work on it. You actually have to do the work. And that's where most people stop. They take step 1. Yeah, I'm going to work on my listening. But they don't actually intentionally, deliberately, consciously create space for that work to happen and show up. And you probably have this excuse that you're time poor. I reckon you're space poor. You don't create the space to allow your brain to think differently, to act differently. And then, of course, step 3 is you have to then make those changes visible, which can only happen if you're doing step 2. So you may think that you're changing, and intentionally you do, and in your head you do, but no one sees it because we don't make the changes visible enough for them to see the Pete who was and the Pete who is. The interim executive who was there 6 months ago, and here's what I've learned. I've taken the best of both worlds, what happened in 1920 and what I think is going to happen in 22 and beyond. And I've amalgamated them into a better version of myself as a leader. So I'm bringing some good stuff with me, but I'm also conscious there's some Achilles heels in there. There's some blind spots, and I'm working on making those better as best as I can. So what you'll notice me stumbling around empathy. I hope that's okay, but I want you to notice as I do that. And what happens is if you signal it, they'll go, Pete's trying to change. Isn't that cool? Maybe we could do the same thing. It's good that he's trying to change, isn't it? It's fantastic. Maybe we could. And so you become the instrument. You become the beacon for everyone to kind of put, I don't want to say their own needs in front of them, but we know we can't pour from an empty cup. And so it's being selfish to be selfless. You're far better at serving others in service of others if you're in your best possible state. Yep. And so a question I'd prompt you to think about is, if we drew a line across the screen here, and many of you have come across the concept of above and below the line, and it's used in many different circumstances. I would ask you to consider that above the line, that's your A game. That's you at your best. That's you at the top of your game. Below the line is your B game and everything else, whatever that might be. The language you use, your physiology, your own internal health, your ability to relax and get restorative sleep, the ability to engage, whatever it is, do you know what triggers your A game and what triggers your B game? Do you get yourself in a good state? And you probably do this. If you've then got a board presentation to complete, you can go, this is really important. I've got to get up for this. I've got to be at my best. Thinking about what triggers that version of you versus what triggers you into the lesser version, B game and everything else. And just the awareness of those triggers is enough for you to start to go to work on those. Because if you're the A game all the time, let me give you a bit of a warning, no one's going to like you. You're going to have no mates. No one likes people that are perfectly on their A game all of the time. But if you know what triggers you to go above the line and below the line, you are far more aware and you're far more in control of deliberately, consciously, intentionally showing up as a better version of you. Because I think that's what people are asking us to be. I'll pause there, Paul.
Fantastic. Thanks, Pete. I saw on that when you were talking about A game and B game and being aware of the triggers, I saw this quote, awareness is the greatest agent of change. And I think that's really what you're rightly saying there, that if you can understand what the triggers are, then you can make change, can't you? You can make that, and then you make that change visible, and then it becomes the people are aware that you're trying to change, and you can help them change too.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Pete and Paul, thank you. I just, as I was when we did the walkthrough of this conversation, am speechless. And as I reflect on, you know, who I want to show up to be as we move forward, and I think, you know, that conversation about it starts with us and the why and the who, and doing the hard work. You know, is really the hard work. Thank you everybody for your conversation down the side in the chat there as well, responding to each other's comments. Look, gosh, there's, you know, dozens of comments and reflections as we've gone through the topics, and I'd like to, best I can, and please people feel free to repost your question in case I miss it, but I am trying to go back through the conversation here just so we can continue this. A lot of reflections around sort of the 3 tips and leadership, and how people are, one, I think, thinking about themselves turning up into the workplace, but 2, their observation of others, and a chain of conversation here around how this conversation reflects up to the board level as well, and what boards might need to be thinking about. I wonder if either of you have got any sort of commentary on that.
Would you like to go first, Paul?
I think at the moment boards are probably complicit to a lesser or greater degree in the burnout that's occurring, by perhaps more of a focus on the numbers. So Pete rightly talked about this people or task kind of choice, and I think that's the courage of leadership, and that's the courage of boards, is getting that balance right, and for easing back on the task when you know that your people need more help, more space, whatever it might be. So boards have got as much responsibility as everyone else to make sure that the human challenges are supported.
Yep. Yep.
I'll make one comment, Donna, and first of all, caveat: I'm a motivated amateur in this space. I haven't for a while served on a board. I have previously, and I have no current board position. So I'm speaking as an observer of a lot of the executive teams I work with and what I hear from them.
Yep.
And so it could be an amateur. We've probably got board members on the call.
Mm-hmm.
It seems as an outsider that, and there's some real heavyweight, amazing individuals that are sitting on some of our boards in this country. And it seems to be a very small pool. And so I hear constantly, you know, Donna Burt is on 5 boards.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't know physically, emotionally, relationship-wise, given it's 150 board papers on a Wednesday night before the board meeting on a Thursday, that you can make sense of that.
Yeah.
And I just don't know if maybe there's a bigger pool required. Maybe there's a deeper responsibility to only talk strategic. Now, obviously, it depends on the executive team. I get it. I just don't know if I could process all of that information and be seen to try and make sense of it in a meaningful and fulfilling way, probably not just for the organization I'm part of, but for our customers in so many situations. So again, I think there's probably, like our organizations and like I think I saw in some of the comments, like our people, there's probably a repurposing required. What's the purpose? Why do we exist as a board? And even if it's just to drive the numbers, and then that clarity, I think, will help. And I'm not sure. I know that I don't believe that in the executive world, that question is given enough depth and silence. And I think I said before, one of the challenges with smart people, and I assume we're all smart by one degree, is we try and make sense of things too quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in my intelligence and smartness, if I make sense of it too quickly, then by definition, I'm blocking out other options.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's sometimes what happens.
I think we're all probably sitting here thinking that's what we've all been doing at certain times. I wanted to pick up on another topic. There was a thread here around sort of talking about sustainability of organisations, and I know a conversation that we picked up, you know, in this period that we've expected, and talking about diversity broadly, be it gender, be it cultural. If there are, you know, what's your view around you know, sort of the diversity challenges businesses are trying to overcome, and how that may or may not have been impacted by COVID, either in a positive way or a negative way? And I guess I'm linking back to some of the emergent challenges from working from home, and, you know, as we're thinking about returning to the workplace and so forth. What's your sense there?
I'll certainly reference something I read recently where I think it was out of the UK, so not necessarily here, but I would expect it to be the same, that throughout lockdown and the pandemic, that women are more burnt out than men because of this wrongly held and assumption that, you know, women are the caregivers and the, you know, all that sort of stuff. And, you know, men have gone on, thank God for that. Can't wait to get back to work. And I don't know if any of that's true, but I do wonder. And I come from a place that I think one size fits one. Meaning, I know organizations have to have policies in place for the greater good and the bell curve, but I wonder at the edges, if we're doing enough to lean into those, where does one size fit one? And Donna's circumstances might be very different to Paul's, and yet they both sit on our exec. Have I really gone into the depth of what's behind the mask of them showing up every week as executives to go, what's behind the scenes there? Yeah. Are we getting enough? Do we getting enough diverse views about what's not going to work? Have we got, you know, the kids coming through? Have we got their views? And are we not necessarily going to make decisions based on it, but it opens up our minds to what could be, not necessarily getting stuck, which tends to happen in a VUCA environment. Here's what is.
Yep.
And we can latch onto that certainty, and by opening things up and being more diverse, it by definition creates more uncertainty. We don't want any more uncertainty. We don't want any more views.
Yep.
And so I think as an executive, our ability to handle that paradox, to handle the things on this side and on this, and then go, whoa, I'm going to sit in the middle for a bit, and whoa, is there a bit of both and here as opposed to either or?
Yep. Yep. Paul, any additional thoughts on that one?
No more views. No, nothing. No.
It's a sensitive topic, isn't it?
It is a sensitive topic. One of many. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just looking at the Q&A here, that and a lot are sort of reflections, I guess, as opposed to questions. But Kate, I can see a question here from you. Kate's question is, how do we best create trusted feedback loops so we know whether we're getting there or not? And there, I guess, or not, could be on a range of fronts as we kind of emerge back out of here. So how do we create those trusted feedback loops? Any thoughts on that?
You want to go first, Paul? Because I've got a few.
Well, I'll just mention one, which is where I've seen this not work, is where there are consequences to suggestions of feedback that wasn't taken in the right way or wasn't welcomed. It was set up to be, we want feedback. Feedback was given, and there were negative consequences to that feedback because it wasn't the message that the leadership team wanted to hear. And that creates a psychologically unsafe environment, and you're not going to get the right feedback moving forward, or feedback that might be constructive. So my only point really is that you've just got to remove that thread of negative consequences for feedback that might not be the message that you want to hear as a senior leader.
Yep. Pete,
you're
next. Ready to contribute. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm itching to talk about this. We could talk the whole hour on this. A couple of things I'll first of all say. Feedback. Be clear on your purpose. If you're creating a feedback loop, is it the content you're interested, or do you want them to feel heard? Massive distinction. Massive difference in terms of how you respond to it. That's one thing I would say. The second thing I would say is, as executives, stop asking for feedback. What? Let me explain. There's been some new research suggesting that as executives, when you ask for feedback and they're a direct report or a peer, you're probably going to get soft, vague, oh, Pete, you need to be a bit better at this and a bit better at that, and you're really good at this. And I sit there as the recipient and go, oh, I prefer the constructive stuff, but we obviously don't have a safe enough environment in which you can say it because you might think I'm going to upset them, et cetera, et cetera. That's feedback, and it's based on the past. And it's usually only a picture, never a video. So I'm considering and asking executives to actually ask for advice. And that's counter to what we've been told to do. But let me explain. So if you position yourself as an ideal future self, right? I'm going to exaggerate. I'd like to be prime minister one day. Got any advice for me? Now, what they're going to do is, first of all, go, you? Nah, not you. But they're going to give you advice that's probably more practical, probably more pragmatic, but it's based on a future view, not a current view, which is safer psychologically for me to go, yeah, I can give Pete feedback on him wanting to be a prime minister because that's not going to hurt me. It's all future based. So it's getting into this different mindset around feed forward versus feedback.
Love that concept.
Great insight, Pete.
Yeah.
Now, the challenge is, what I've learned from executives is I read it somewhere yesterday, we pay attention to about 4% of the information that's available. Some executives will pick that up, they'll take it literally, and all they will now do is ask for advice, not feedback. And I'm saying yes, and
yeah,
can you be intentional enough, you know when to turn that advice question up or turn the feedback question up? Can you do it with intention and deliberateness and consciousness? That is the key. And if we can get better at toggling between task and people, stakeholder and shareholder, customer and, all those different things that we have to toggle against, and we get really agile, and I don't mean in the agile sense, I mean mentally agile, in toggling between them, hence the infinity loop.
Yep.
Right? We've over-indexed on that too much now. Oh, we need to come back a little bit. And we've over-indexed on that too much. We need to come back a little bit. So please don't take it literally, only ever ask for advice. But if you can toggle between your feedback loops and mechanisms, and why is that in place, for what reason? And also as an executive based on a future self, what advice do you have for me? You'll find that you've got more content, more pragmatic things to do as a consequence based on what they see.
Fabulous feedback. And I love this concept of the infinity loop and this constant kind of, sort of balancing those expectations. We've gone too far this way, we can come back that way. Your views around, we're malleable, we can change, we've got to choose to want to do the work, I guess, to do that. A hypothetical question that came up earlier in the session, which I wouldn't mind posing to you, and Paul sort of tied back into your sort of starting comments around the financial side of businesses and needing to sort of hit the numbers, but actually, as an economy, there are many signs to suggest that actually we've grown, GDP has grown, the ASX listings, the value of businesses has accumulated. We appreciate there's been certain sectors that have been really hit. But the question said, how sustainable do you think are these good results? And a hypothetical would be, if we were to sort of stay in this pandemic for another 6 months, 18 months, how sustainable do you think that would be? What's kind of your view and opinion on the sort of what's behind those, I guess, financial results?
So we may have different views, obviously, but to me, they're lag indicators and they're financial indicators only. So what's just around the corner is that we've got some real issues from a human perspective And if you just take one, if you just take that 1 in 2 people are looking for a new job in the next year, and that the dislocation that comes from having to turn over half your workforce, that in itself is just a huge issue that we will see reflected in the numbers in 18 months or 2 years' time. It can only be that way whether we're in lockdown or not. So we probably want to start to look at lead numbers that will give us the early warning signs that we've got problems on the way, because at least that gives us a chance to tackle those challenges with some of the things that we've talked about today. More sort of empathy around what's going on in the workforce.
Yeah, and really off the back of that, to be honest, a lot of the thread has very much been about the teams, the people on the conversation about, sort of being clear around purpose, as we've spoken to, and tying to that the empathy. And I would link that back to Watermark's interim survey earlier on in the year, where resoundingly this year, this sort of that emotional intelligence, empathy, and that way of being was certainly, the key reason, I guess, that the clients were, or the key trait, I guess, clients were really attracted to in the interim executive cohort and executive population. Those who are able to sort of demonstrate that in this VUCA environment were certainly the ones certainly being placed. I am very mindful we are sort of 2 minutes off the hour, so I will start to wrap up. We will thank you to everybody for your conversation thread. I'll absolutely share that with Pete and Paul. We will go through and look if there are any other questions that we feel sort of haven't been touched on. We'll look to try and address those potentially in some of the slide decks post this, to just make sure that the content was covered. We'll also share with you Pete and Paul's details if you feel free to reach out. But Pete and Paul, again, thank you. So many invaluable tips, insights. It has really been brilliant. The thread's going a bit crazy now with people thanking you for those insights, always pragmatic, and I think tips that people can actually really take away and go forward and do one thing and be different and try that and test it and change. So thanks both for your time and preparation in this. Really, really, really appreciate it. Thank you for everybody on the session who's joined us today. Look out for the follow-up communication from the Watermark team. And yeah, really, really value your contribution today. And yeah, I've good to see everything coming through there. There are many, many thanks, which I will pass on to you all both after this session. I don't know if there's any sort of final comments you want to make.
I just wanted to thank you, Pete. I could listen to you all day with your insights. And thank you, Donna, for the opportunity for us to talk today.
Welcome. Pete, thanks so much.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks, Watermark. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for everyone that's listening. And you would be doing ourselves and yourself a great disservice if you did not take one thing and do it today.
Thank you for that fabulous note to end on. Thanks to everybody, and we'll look forward to you joining us next on our next series of webinars. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.